Greetings and salutations, boys and girls, and children of all ages. And welcome back to Colecast, the podcast for all of us. And today, we are going to go right back into a topic that you all know is near and dear to me, and that I love and have a extreme passion for. We are going to go back in and talk about professional wrestling. That's right. And last episode that we did in regards to wrestling was really just kind of an intro. But one thing, unfortunately, we didn't have the time to get into was who are my all-time favorite professional wrestlers. And that's what we're going to talk about today. As in today's episode, we are going to talk about That Makes a Baker's Dozen. That's right. It's my Baker's Dozen, my top 13 favorite professional wrestlers of all time. And man, I got to tell you guys and gals, this was so difficult for me just to narrow it down to 13 because there's so many professional wrestlers out there that I love who just have amazing bodies of work. And it's really difficult to narrow it down to 13. So that being said, I got to start off right off the bat with some honorable mentions because there was a ton that it was so hard to narrow this down to 13, man. It's like asking me to pick your favorite child, that type of thing. So, that being said, I want to do some shout outs here real quick for some of my honorable mentions, and then we'll get right into our Baker's Dozen. And first off, I'm going to say this. I absolutely love the landscape of professional wrestling that's happened here in like the past 5 years or so. And that being said, I love that like here, at least in North America anyway, women's wrestling is finally there is getting its just due. It's not like it was many years ago where it was a how do I say this? Well, call a spade a spade. It was women were referred to or looked at as eye candy, and not one of the boys, so to speak. So that being said, I do have some gals on my list here, or my honorable mention list. But I just want to say the reason I don't have them on my list is number one, the list is so loaded and just such a rich history of all these athletes who I've loved and gotten to know over years. And also, I just have to say that it was just so hard, man. It's so hard. But I'm gonna go ahead and throw out a couple names right off the bat. The Boss, Sasha Banks, and Bayley. I definitely have enjoyed it. I love all the four horsewomen, Charlotte, Becky Lynch included. But man, I think I mentioned this on the first podcast we did here on wrestling. How that Sasha Banks Bayley match from NXT Takeover Brooklyn just really resonated with me and kind of brought me back into wrestling among a couple other things. So, got to give a shout out to those girls, and they have incredible bodies of work. And I tell you, Sasha Banks, man, is such a talented worker. And if you just look at this past year at WrestleMania in the main event against Bianca Belair, the psychology of that match. I mean, and to me, like what makes all these people on my list great is it's a combination of things. It's everything from their character to their promo to their in-ring work, their skill levels, their persona, hell, even the entrance music. All of that wrapped up into one is what makes a great professional wrestler. And there's a lot of greats out there. But once again, I got to give an honorable mention to those two gals, as well as and some of these may surprise you that they're not on my list, but CM Punk didn't quite make my list, although I love CM Punk, as well as Bryan Danielson. Samoa Joe, I'm going to put on there too, because I really loved watching Ring of Honor in those early days, and that's really where I got hooked on those guys. Also, I'm going to put on there Rob Van Dam, who I absolutely love, but just couldn't quite make the cut for me. Incredible body of work, and I love ECW, and trust me, that will be an episode unto itself. And speaking of ECW, a lesser known one, I would say, but kind of, I just always have loved this guy, Steve Corino. Is going to get an honorable mention from me. Very impressive wrestler. Loved his character in the late 90s in ECW. And also, I got to give a shout out to some of my Japanese wrestlers. Jushin Thunder Liger, an incredible, phenomenal talent. Kenta Kobashi. And we also throw in there Kurt Angle. But there's two I do want to talk about here momentarily before I get to the Baker's Dozen. And the first thing I got to talk about, and this is still tough to talk about to this day, but it's weird how over the years it's like my opinions kind of, I don't want to say opinions, just you've had time to process things. And maybe I shouldn't even call it an honorable mention for this gentleman, but this guy was if and it's so hard to say, but if what didn't happen happened to him and like the controversy and stuff, he probably would be my number one, honestly. But my favorite wrestler back in the day was Chris Benoit, and I think most of you probably know what happened there. But for those of you who don't, he was a professional wrestler, wrestled for years, and back in 2006, I believe it was, or maybe it was 7. I think it was 07, yeah. He unfortunately, I mean, it's still not really known what exactly happened there, but ultimately his actions resulted in the tragic death of his wife and his very young child, as well as himself. We'll leave it at that. But if you take that out of it, what a freaking phenomenal professional wrestler, man. I mean, the guy now his mic skills, not so much, but he could coast off of his physicality in the ring. But it's a sad, tragic story. And honestly, it's part of what took me away from wrestling for several years. But I can't like not talk about this and not mention his name. Because I mean, I was a huge fan of his, but it is what it is. I hate that damn saying, but it is what it is. And lastly, I'm going to give an honorable mention, and I leave this person last because this person pretty much was within a hair of making my top 13 list. But honestly, this guy I discovered, truth be told, later on in life. But man, I absolutely love his story and love his body of work, and that would be the one, the only. Oh yeah, wait for it, kids. Misawa. I have to have a shout out to Mitsuharu Misawa. And I probably butchered his name, but you talk about an amazing story, character, and what all he accomplished in his career. My God, you could write a book. I mean, arguably, probably one of the greatest Japanese professional wrestlers of all time. It may be the best Japanese professional wrestler of all time. But I love his story, is how he started off with the world-famous Tiger Mask gimmick. So he was like actually a lightweight, cruiserweight type of wrestler. He was the second incarnation. And he started wrestling around or at least when that happened, that was like 84, I want to say. And then, interestingly enough, in 1990, there's a rich history with wrestlers and masks, especially if you look at Lucha Libre. Now, granted, we're not talking about Lucha Libre here, but a rich history nonetheless. And interestingly enough for him, he didn't lose his mask. He just took it off. But what it was is at the time in All Japan Pro Wrestling, their number one wrestler, Junichiro Tenryu, had stepped down, I believe, and they needed a new star. So Misawa just in a tag team match, like mid match, takes off his mask and it just goes apeshit crazy. So and attacks his opponents, and started a feud. I believe it was with Jumbo, and I'm going to butcher these names. I do apologize, but Jumbo Tsuruta. And then pretty much became the ace of All Japan. So he started having matches with him. But what was really cool about it is he literally went from being like a cruiserweight to that style, to the high flying style, to incorporating some of that high flying style into a more Puryosu Japanese style, the hard hitting physicality moves, some more technical abilities, if you will. And then in the 90s, man, he just become the ace of All Japan. And my gosh, the 4 Pillars of Heaven, as part of that, those guys who helped pretty much put All Japan on the map. And then multiple reigns as the All Japan champion. Ended up leaving in 2000, I believe it was, or so, and started up his own company, Pro Wrestling Noah, which still goes strong to this day. And unfortunately for him, in I believe it was 2009 or something like that, he did pass away, and actually died in the ring, believe it or not. I believe it was like a tag match or something, and I think he... I think it was like he took a belly to back suplex and it caused like a brain aneurysm or something. But yeah, but the dude works super stiff. You ask any true Japanese wrestling fan, that he's going to be a name on the top of the list. Now, so I got to give him a huge honorable mention. And like I say, the only reason he really didn't make my list is because, like I said, I really didn't discover him till about, I would say, maybe 5 or 6 years ago. I'd heard of the name, but thankfully, with YouTube, was able to kind of discover some of his work. And I wasn't like huge. Like, I did tape trading back in the day, but it was very hard. Like, the Japanese stuff we went after was more so like FMW stuff because we were into the crazy hardcore shit, like, you know. But yeah, if you are a true Japanese wrestling fan, you absolutely have to watch some of his matches because, my God, they're incredible. But those are my honorable mentions. But it's time to get into my top 13. Here we go. My baker's dozen.
That makes a baker's dozen.
And for my number 13, oh yeah!
I lie, I cheat, I steal. I lie, I cheat, I steal. Yo, mamacita, I got that passion that's lasting long.
Man, if you guys could just see the big shit-eating grin on my face right now. That's right. Eddie Guerrero is my number 13. So this list is going to be themom.com because we're starting it off right here. Eddie Guerrero. My God, what can you not say about Eddie freaking Guerrero? I can't stop smiling. My God. The dude that... You talk about total package. Eddie Guerrero had the total package. And probably the biggest disadvantage he had was just not his size. In a typical world of wrestlers, when he came up, he wasn't a giant of a man. I mean, I think he was like 5'9", 5'10", like maybe 220 or something like that. He wasn't a big dude, but could he go in the ring, man? Thankfully, though, like in the mid-90s, you know, you saw a change in the styles of wrestling. But my God, Eddie Guerrero. And you know what's amazing to me about him is it's not like Guerrero Eddie was like the first pro wrestler. I mean, he comes from a historic professional wrestling family in the Guerreros. with his brothers Mondo and Hector and Chavo, and for him to kind of carve his own path and do what he did is just what an incredible story for him. But Eddie Guerrero and his body of work and what he did, and if you look back, and I mean, he wrestled everywhere. I mean, obviously the U.S., of course, but he wrestled in Japan. He wrestled in Mexico, of course, and you have to start off there in Mexico. And the very first time I ever saw Eddie Guerrero was actually in WCW, and he came out on I think it was before Clash of the Champions or something. And they used to, so WCW would have the main event on TBS on Sunday nights. So, and this just so happened to be a clash they did on a Sunday. And he came out and wrestled, I feel like I want to say Brad Armstrong or somebody like that. Maybe it was one of the Armstrongs or something. And I just remember watching him and just being like, "Oh, this guy's good." And then kind of looking back on his history and you got to mention what he did in Mexico. And without a shadow of a doubt, the very first real thing that kind of put Eddie on the map was his tag team career he formed with Art Barr, and what those guys did, and how Eddie. So Eddie was like a white meat baby face, especially coming from a famous Mexican wrestling family, right? And for him to 180 and turn into a super heel, if you will, and forming up with Art Barr, who used to portray a wrestler, or used to portray one of his personas was Beetlejuice, believe it or not, and it was loosely based off of Beetlejuice from the movies. It's and his story is interesting in itself. And trust me, if you're really interested, you could always Wikipedia that shit. That's right, kids, because everybody gets one. So no, so he formed a partnership with Art Barr, and they became the La Perla del Terror, or the Pain of Terror. And they probably was a freaking ridiculously heelish bad guy group, and then they had a super group with they were called Los Gringos Locos, with Luis Piccoli, Conan, and a couple other guys, I think. But what I remember seeing from this guys kind of goes back into tape trading. The first ever AAA pay-per-view in America, when Worlds Collide, and a hell of a tag team match with the La Perla del Terror against super white meat babyface El Hijo del Santo and Octagon. And it was if you're not familiar with Lucha Libre, they do 2 out of 3 fall matches, right? And ended up, it was a hair versus mask match, which was very common and popular in those days to kind of set off a feud. But anyways, long story short, Eddie and Art Barr lost the match and ended up getting their heads shaved. And sadly, that would be their swan song, because literally, I believe a month or two later, Art Barr passed away. But here's the thing. Everybody knows Eddie Guerrero for the Frog Splash. The Frog Splash came from Art Barr, actually. And if you go back and look at some of his body of work, they called it a Frog Splash literally because he looked like a damn frog doing it. So anyways, and then you fast forward Eddie's career. So Eddie first gets his real big start in America by wrestling for ECW, and has some insanely awesome matches with Dean Malenko. And just their farewell match from ECW. Because, I mean, shit, he was only in ECW really for probably about less than a year. Because he was one of the first guys really signed up from WCW as far as from international stars. And it was him and Benoit. And, of course, if you know Eddie, his history and stuff, you know the friendship he had with Chris Benoit and Dean Malenko and those guys. And then if you look at Eddie's body of work in WCW, he started off just this fucking white meat babyface, man. just like chew your vitamins and drink your milk and shit, and it's like do the right thing, and he was like a hard worker, and he always was awesome in the ring. One of his earlier feuds that I loved was against Diamond Dallas Page. Now here's the cool thing with Eddie is Eddie could have been like put into like the cruiserweights and just like that's it. He's just a cruiserweight wrestler, but that wasn't the case. No, so Eddie actually ended up wrestling bigger guys, man. And DDP was definitely one of them. And I mean, he was even put in like title pictures where he wrestled for the U.S. title. Hell, he challenged Ric Flair for the United States Championship on pay-per-view. It was actually the WCW Hog Wild pay-per-view from Sturgis, South Dakota. But anyways, Eddie did that, and then like they kind of turn him into like a heel. I think 97-ish. And then he does work in the cruiserweight, starts working more in the cruiserweight division and wins the cruiserweight title. But the one match everybody always talks about as far as Eddie and WCW, you have to talk about the match he had with Rey Mysterio at Halloween Havoc 97. And holy shit. That is a picture perfect match. And it had a great story to it. Rey Mysterio putting his mask up on the line. And I always remember the finish of that match. But Eddie, and something else I gotta say I loved about Eddie in that time frame too was when he was wrestling his nephew Chavo, and Chavo was really like that. He really helped get Chavo over because it was just kind of like, oh, okay, Chavo's just another Guerrero, but it really showed his personality because Chavo went all crazy and shit. And remember he had his like, what was it? His pet horse, which was like a toy stick horse called Pepe. But it really showed his personality. But anyways, so Eddie has had a good run in WCW, but obviously was he going to be pushed in the main events? Probably not. Mid card at best. So then he jumped ship in 2000 with his friends, with Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn as well. And they formed the Radicals in WWE. And like I think it's literally they debuted on a Monday night and then they show up on SmackDown on Thursday, the first time wrestling matches, which they taped SmackDown back then on Tuesdays. And I can remember Eddie does the frog splash and breaks his arm and is not able to wrestle. And this is like February of 2000? And shit, he wrestles on the card at WrestleMania, which was in April. So that just shows you Eddie Guerrero. But so Eddie had and he did a pretty decent run. And when he got to WWE, he he had a good run there. And he really started to see more character development out of him. Like you got to see like yes the physicality, but this is where Eddie's like career really changes, where he goes into like his Latino Heat character. They put him with China, do some funny segments there. Unfortunately for Eddie, though, his demons would get the best of him around this time, and the company had to let him go. But he overcame those demons, and it's just an incredible story for that Eddie Guerrero was able to do that. And literally, like a year later, he comes back, and he involves his character all the more, and that's where the line, the cheating, stealing Eddie Guerrero comes into effect, and he's just like the classic, like he's a baby face, but he does heelish shit. That's the best way to describe it. And he was like the first guy I can remember really where he would like take a chair and bang it on the mat or something and throw it to his opponent, and then he would lay there like he was attacked by his opponent or whatever. And of course the pinnacle for him would be like ended up ultimately winning the WWE Championship from Brock Lesnar of all people, and what is still probably one of the all-time greatest title changes in WWE history. Such an incredible feel-good moment for him and I'm so happy and blessed. I feel like to have gotten to watch him wrestle over the years. And here's something that's uncanny. So, unfortunately for Eddie, he would pass away in '05. So his run at the top of the main event scene was short, but it was still memorable. Because he won the title and had the incredible feuds with Kurt Angle and putting JBL on the mat as like a super heel, and having some incredible matches with Rey Mysterio and stuff. He was just touching the surface really of his true greatness. But I was actually I got to see Eddie Guerrero wrestle his very last match. I was in Indianapolis at a SmackDown taping, and it's funny because I wasn't gonna go, and then my friend Matt convinced me to end up going, and sure enough, Eddie wrestled Mr. Kennedy, and that would be we wouldn't know, but that'd be Eddie's last match. It's a sad story that he passed away the way he did, but it's also an amazing story too, in a sense of like how he was able to flip things around and really make a name for himself. So I could talk all day about Eddie Guerrero, but Eddie Guerrero is my number 13 on my baker's dozen of my favorite wrestlers of all time. Now, are you all ready for my number 12?
Well, they call him the natural. Natural as can be. Yeah, they call him the natural. He just comes naturally. He's the son of a son. And the
That's
son
right.
of a gun.
We talking the natural Dustin Rhodes. Now, some of you and Dustin Rhodes is still wrestling to this day. And he's got an incredible body of work too throughout all of his career. And majority of people know him as Goldust, and that Goldust character was a freaking awesome, awesome, awesome character, no doubt about it. But for me, I actually like Dustin back in like his WCW days there as the Natural. I tell you, man. I love watching, and I can still watch him to this day, his matches in the early 90s, matches he had with guys like Steve Austin and Barry Windham and Rick Rude and all these other guys, and it's just like their clinics, man. Moves smooth in the ring. Now, truth be told, at the start of his career, wasn't the greatest as far as promos, but here's the thing, guys. Think about this. You are a second generation wrestler, and your dad's the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. You got to keep in mind too, when Dustin came in to start wrestling, there wasn't a whole hell of a lot of second generation talents. I think maybe a couple, that come to mind, like Bob Orton and maybe Tully Blanchard and stuff. But not only, though, to be like a second generation wrestler, but your dad's freaking Dusty Rhodes. So I think it was a little bit of identity crisis for him when he first came, because it's like he's trying to imitate his dad, and you can like even hear it in his promos. He talks like his dad, he kind of has that wisp, if you will. But man, smooth as silk in the ring. Gosh darn, man. Like, I tell you what, you want a hell of a fun time to watch some of his matches. Let me tell you, go back to Halloween Havoc 1991 and watch his match against Steve Austin for the television title. Fucking awesome match. And so many more. But I loved his stuff he did in WCW. He had a great run with Barry Windham as his tag partner, and God, those guys had some matches. Won the tag titles, won the U.S. title, had a good run with that. Now, towards the end of his beginning of his WCW career, it was kind of watered down, but feuding with the Colonel Parker stable. But the beginning of that was awesome. He had some fucking awesome matches with Bunkhouse Buck in like '94. Go back and watch those too. You can watch those on the network, or you can YouTube them, whatever. But that was the shit, man. But everybody knows him as Goldust. So here he is. He's kind of like Dustin. If you look at his career, he's kind of like he's kind of got it made, in a sense. Like he's good. He's good in the ring. He does okay on the mic, but he's tired of that persona. He's tired of being Dusty's kid. So he completely flips it around and does this character, the misogyn. What's the word here I'm looking for? The alternative lifestyle. Let's go with that. As far as with the character of Goldust, and I mean Goldust was way ahead of his time. I mean, my gosh, you talk about a unique cat. The one and only. That's right. I can remember seeing his promos as a kid, and I gotta be honest with you guys, as a kid, I didn't realize it was Dustin. I was like, who is that? And then when I started watching him wrestle, I'm like, holy shit, that's freaking Dustin Rhodes. But man, the promos he did and the way he did that character, there would have been nobody else on the planet that could have played that character like he did. And he had a hell of a run there in WWF too, winning the Intercontinental title from Razor Ramon, having that insanely awesome match at WrestleMania 12 against, or if you, maybe you don't want to call it a match, but the Hollywood Backlot Brawl with Rowdy Piper. That was some fun shit. And then he had a good run, had some great matches with The Undertaker all throughout. And then they turned him into a babyface in the Attitude-ish era. And that was unique, seeing him feud with guys like Triple H and Brian Pillman and stuff. And then, later on going into watching him, his character changed into just this. I remember he flipped around a lot, truth be told. But everything he did, man, was good as far as I was concerned. Great, one of the greatest Intercontinental champions, in my opinion. That was an amazing run as Goldust. But he switched his character around, was with Luna Vachon as his manager, and that was a great pairing. Then I believe he left for a while and came back as Goldust. And then he left and went to go back to work for WCW in 2000. Well, no, I think it's 99 actually, and they were going to bring him in as a character called Seven, which was like a parody. I think they watched the movie fucking Dark City or something like, all right, let's do that. Which was kind of going to be this dark character like The Undertaker, and then they just turned it into the whole schmoz thing. He's like, I'm going back to being the natural. But anyways, you see him in the late 2000s of WCW, and it's kind of meh. He comes back and works WWE again in 2002. Does the Goldust character again and redefines it yet again. And of all people, has an amazing tag team partnership with Booker T. And they were just like the oddball couple. Did some incredible skits and fun stuff there. Went on to win the tag team titles with Booker T. And then he did on again off again WWE throughout the years. He did have a run in TNA. Wasn't a fan of that, and I mean at that time too, Dustin was just I think he was in a really dark place. But the thing is, my God, and you may say how do you put him above Eddie? And once again, I'm not saying necessarily on my list here that one guy's better than the other or whatever. These are all amazing talents. But Dustin Rhodes was another one of those guys, had a redemption story. How about I don't know how old he was, in his close to 50, let's say 50, and he literally had a couple years ago, Pro Wrestling Illustrated voted it as the match of the year against his brother Cody in AEW. Fuck. What a hell of a match that was. Great storytelling, physicality, fucking awesome. And he could have hung it up off of that. But no, he's still going, man. I mean, shit, a couple weeks ago, he wrestled Bryan Danielson in the AEW title eliminator tournament. Had a fucking awesome match. And he's evolved his character, and he's evolved his in-ring style. And he can still go. He can still go at the ripe old age of in his 50s. So, Dustin Rhodes, absolutely love you. Such an amazing talent. And the guy is definitely a first ballot Hall of Famer and should be in the Hall of Fame. So that is my number 12. Now my number 11. You know. That's right. Shinsuke Nakamura. And I gotta tell you, like, and the reason I have him a little bit higher on my list, I would say, is because Shinsuke Nakamura is the reason I started watching New Japan Pro Wrestling. Back in, well, hell, probably would have been about 6 or 7 years ago, or whatever it was. Because his character, oh my god! And then you go back and you see his backstory and stuff of how he had evolved. And he started off young and was like, started off in the main event picture and was the IWGP Heavyweight Champion in his first couple years in the business, and he was an MMA fighter. And he was just kind of like the badass, like strong style Japanese wrestler and stuff. But I think when he formed Chaos and went heel is when Shinsuke Nakamura really his character started to develop and strive. And if you look back and see how he went and like he started to like have more personality, his entrances were more elaborate. And as much and as great as everybody loves that theme that I just played there, you could argue back and forth between that theme and his New Japan theme, because his New Japan theme was off the hook, dude. Like it just like him coming out, and I'll never forget. So the first time I see Nakamura, it's Wrestle Kingdom 8, I'm pretty sure, and he comes out to this elaborate entrance. He's got like a crown on his head and stuff. And he's like got a rock star quality about him, kind of like Michael Jackson. He's got the jacket on, and he's doing like the Freddie Mercury stuff. And he comes out, man, and you're like, yeah, listen to this. So this is his New Japan theme. As great as the theme was in WWE was, this, I don't know, dude. This one may be better, honestly. Just the build. This is, oh yeah, here we go. That guitar riff, man. And he comes out and he's doing his thing, Shinsuke Nakamura. Such an incredible talent, man. And then, like, the stuff he did in New Japan, really kind of being, to me as a fan, it was like the first time where I'm watching Japanese wrestling and I'm seeing, like, real character development as far as a North American style of just a uniqueness, kind of off the charts character. He was the first real guy I noticed like that. So for me, Shinsuke is why I started watching New Japan. And then, of course, he ends up jumping ship to WWE a couple years later. And his body of work there. Well, if the New Japan stuff's just hard to top, in my opinion. But he did a damn good job of doing the best he could with what he had to work with. Because they bring him in NXT, and that's just fucking awesome. First match against Sami Zayn, holy shit. The stuff he did with Samoa Joe, awesome. But like any NXT wrestler who gets that Hall of Doom, if you will, they call him up to the main roster, and you're like, oh, fuck, how are they going to handle this? And they didn't do the greatest, because it's fucking WWE, and I'm not going to get on a tangent of that, but once again, it is what it is. And they don't, like, they put him in the main event picture, but it's just like, there is no, I'm sorry, but there is no fucking way, and there's no disrespect to the guy, but there's no fucking way Shinsuke Nakamura should lose to Jinder Mahal. Like, and they had that match at SummerSlam, or did it for a couple of pay-per-views and shit. And then it's kind of like, okay, then they kind of go back to bringing him back in the main event scene by having him win the Royal Rumble. And in the history books, he is the first Asian to ever win a Royal Rumble. And here's a fun little bullshit fact of the day for you. He wins the Rumble, and that night, he's one of two Asian people to win a Royal Rumble, because later on, Asuka would win the female version. So how ironic is that? But goes on, has a pretty awesome feud with AJ Styles, turns heel in the process, and then just they haven't really done shit with him, because I'm surprised, honestly, he's still with WWE. Now, they've done some stuff here and there with him, like he's currently is the Intercontinental Champion, but it's just one of those things where it's the main roster, and if it's not, folks, it's sports entertainment, it's not pro wrestling. So I will be excited the day he comes back to New Japan, because it's going to happen at some point, and to see some matches he can have with, like, again, with Kazuchika Okada. And he had some awesome matches in New Japan's day with the Ace, Hiroshi Tanahashi, and so many other guys there. But Shinsuke gets high rankings on my list just simply for the fact of he is one of the main reasons why I started watching New Japan. So that being said, now it's time to move on. Let's talk about my number 10 entrant on my list. And we're going to go back to some ECW days, folks. Oh, yes! Beat me if you can. Survive if I let you.
Survive if I let you.
Number 10. The Human Suplex Machine, Taz. Taz, man, there was a lot of great characters in ECW that I love, but Taz honestly was my guy just because he was such a fucking badass. And like, you look at Taz on paper, and you're like, what? Taz? Taz? I mean, shit, Taz is probably, what, 5'7", maybe? 5'6"? Shorter guy. Okay, maybe not that short. Maybe he's like 5'8". I don't know. But Taz, yeah, so he's obviously like not a traditional wrestler, which is what was great about ECW, because that wasn't traditional wrestlers. It was a pitch podge of everybody. But he's just he was built up perfectly, and ECW is this badass motherfucker. And like, honestly, if you really want to see Taz's best work, you got to watch ECW, because let's call a spade a spade. When he got to WWE, they didn't do shit with him, other than his debut, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. But I absolutely loved, like, so when Taz started, he was like the Tasmaniac. So a play off like the Tasmanian Devil, that type of shit, right? And then ended up going on to, like, he unfortunately suffered an injury in a tag team match. I believe it was with Dean Malenko and Too Cold Scorpio, and broke his neck. And was out of action for a while. And they bring him back in. And you got to keep in mind, folks, this is like 95, 96-ish. And Paul Heyman had the smartness to bring him back in and, like, kind of look at his style of wrestling and his history and his past. And he was really, like, big in, like, judo and stuff like that. So at the same time, too, mixed martial arts is just starting to really take off here in North America. You've got UFCs are having their... Now, granted, UFC back then versus UFC now, completely different fucking story. But Taz is just starting to, like, kind of gradually, like, come into it, and they bring him in as, like, a shoot fighter and this badass. And he's just fucking beating everybody, right? Well, there was also a story passed there with his tag team partner, Sabu. And that is probably, if not the greatest, I think the greatest you gotta say is Raven and Dreamer, but definitely in the top 5 greatest rivalries in ECW of all times, Taz and Sabu. So the great thing was about it, they bring Taz back in, and he's just fucking choking out people. And before, he wasn't really, like, cutting promos or anything. He was just, like, the silent, like, badass or whatever. Now, like, he does have a figurehead in Bill Alfonso as his manager, but he's just this bitter, pissed off motherfucker. Just like, I fucking hate everything. I will choke your ass out. Don't fuck with me. And then just and his style in the ring was so physical. Like just the suplexes. I mean, yeah, they called him the human suplex machine for a reason. I always loved it when he'd do the head and arm Tazplex. Or there was one where he hooked the leg and then would hook them in like a half Nelson and fucking suplex. It was crazy. But anyways, so they build to a feud with him and Sabu, and like they don't touch for like a year. They tease it, and then finally they have the match at the very first ECW pay per view, Barely Legal, and it's a good match. It's a good match. Go back and watch it. I mean, it's not as like violent as some ECW matches were, but this didn't necessarily have to be because it was telling a story. And then he just goes on to have this incredible run as the television champion, and ends up another like definitely a milestone for him was the matches he had with Bam Bam Bigelow, and where they went through the ring, literally went through the fucking ring, and Taz was concussed, and then of course his run to get the ECW title, where he's antagonizing Shane Douglas and that lasted for almost a year, I think. And then he ends up creating his own title, the FTW title, which is current today and actually is used on AEW television. But yeah, if you look at that run, man, that was awesome. Then when he gets the ECW title and just gangbusters, then he gets signed by WWE. And like the vignettes they ran to bring him in was pretty cool, I always thought. But then when they get around to actually like when they bring him in, his debut match is the shit. They bring him in at Royal Rumble, Madison Square Garden. It's a mystery opponent of Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle's undefeated at the time, and Taz was the first guy to beat Kurt Angle. I was like, oh, this is fucking great. And then just after that, they didn't have shit for him, and it was just like, they changed his. They put him into like his ring attire changed and just looked like he was a fucking mechanic or something. And like he did kind of have a memorable, if you want to call it memorable, feud with Jerry Lawler. And God bless Jerry Lawler, but Jerry Lawler at this time's like a 50-plus-year-old man. And if you put him up against Taz from ECW '96, Taz would have fucking murdered him in 60 seconds or less. Nothing against Jerry Lawler, but that's just the persona. But Taz, though, was a very talented, and still is to this day, talented person, because he went on to have a tremendous career in broadcasting as a color commentator, and he did that with Michael Cole, and was like those guys were the voice of freaking SmackDown for years. So for me though, it was definitely Taz and ECW that run, but I absolutely got to say you got to respect what he was able to do in later on in his career. And he's still doing it to this day. It's great to see him in AEW. And you got to mention too, he did have a time in TNA where he's doing commentary, and that was pretty decent. But stuff he's doing now with Team Taz is cool, and I love listening to him with Excalibur. That's a really good team, and those guys call matches on AEW Dark, and they're having a blast. You can tell. So, yeah, Taz is my number 10. So now it's time to move on to who is my number 9. I had to think there. Math is scary, folks. My number 9 favorite professional wrestler of all time is this man here. Oh, yeah. The All-American. Ron Simmons. And yes, I know Ron Simmons did so much more in his career, but my favorite incarnation of Ron Simmons was his run in WCW in the early 90s. And you might notice a pattern here, because I got a couple more guys on my list that are around that time frame. I loved me some early 90s WCW, man. I don't think that gets enough love as it should. But Ron Simmons, man. I mean, what can you say about Ron Simmons? Another one within a tremendous career. If you look and see like his start, because we all know him as the All-American, like he played at FSU and was actually a Heisman finalist, believe it or not. So, I mean, shoot, dude, like to go from that and to go into career in professional wrestling, very interesting, his backstory. And he started off really famous, great tag team with, and a great guy to learn from in Butch Reed and the guys in Doom. And those guys was managed by one Teddy Long. And I mean, that was a good group to be put in with. But man, to start off that way, and they had a hell of a run too. And they feuded with the Horsemen. And I mean, this Horseman in the 90s had some great matches with Barry Windham and Arn Anderson. But then, like all things have to come to an end, right? So he ends up having a but they lose the tag. I'm sorry, I'm trying to wreck my nest here. Yes, I remember they lose the tag titles to the Fabulously Freebirds at I believe it was War Games '91, and ends up Butch Reed turns on him, and then there is this big, like they build up this feud for them, and they have a big squash match at the Super Bowl pay-per-view of that year, and ends up Ron wins that. And then they start just giving Ron like a kind of a pretty good push in the main event scene. And rightfully so, man. Looks like $1 million. He can cut promos. They may not be the greatest at that time, but I mean, still though, I mean, the man can talk. And then you got to look at like his background and stuff. So it made sense. And I tell you, one I always liked of his, a match of his I always liked that really got me hooked on Ron Simmons, believe it or not, was a match he had with Lex Luger at Halloween Havoc 91, which was a 2 out of 3 falls match. And it was an interesting story because it was like kind of ahead of its time too, because it was kind of like telling the story of like, Ron being American and it's like, okay, you're not gonna make it, you can be my, I don't want to say slave, but I mean there was like I remember a promo with Harley Race, because Harley Race at the time was the manager of Lex Luger, and I can remember like Harley kind of talking down to him, and it's like, we'll make you our butler or whatever, but if you watch that match, what's believable about it was very smart how they booked that match. And Halloween Havoc 91, I've already mentioned it once, which is weird. I'm talking about it again because it's often known as like a shit show. But the couple matches that were good, which we already mentioned earlier with Dustin and Austin, and this match here were really damn good. Anyways, they were smart in booking that match because Simmons won the first fall, and it's like, holy shit, Simmons is going to win this. He's going to pull this shit off. Did not end up winning that match, and kind of was like still around in the main event scene, but not as much. Kind of main event here and there, and / upper mid card main event, I would say. And then 92, it happens, man. Wrestles Big Fan Vader on an episode of Saturday Night, I believe. And Ron picks up the big 450 plus pound Mastodon power slams. 1, 2, 3. The rest is history. Ron Simmons would go down as the first African American world heavyweight champion. And his run, truth be told, it wasn't as long, but still it was a fun run. I think he held it for like about 4 months or so. Ended up losing it back to Vader. But what I loved about Ron was just, I loved his in-ring skill. Man had a hell of a power slam and a fucking awesome spine buster, dude. A spine buster, it was just like, damn! But Ron Simmons had a great run in WCW. Then he wrestled for ECW, believe it or not, for a very brief time. And then he gets brought into WWF in 96. And the first gimmick he gets brought into is a Spartacus character. That's right. Turn him into fucking African American Spartacus with a stupid ass helmet to boot, and he's managed by Sonny. Made no fucking sense. But thank God that gimmick only lasted for a couple months, because he went into a feud with Ahmed Johnson, who was a very over talent at the time. And he, in reality, I think Ahmed, I don't know if Ron actually hurt him. I don't think it was Ron. Something happened, but anyways, long story short, he got hurt. Ahmed Johnson got hurt, was out for a while. So Ron comes in, and Ron actually changes his character into. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned this, but they called him Farouk, which is what we all know him as, is Farouk. And then he changed that name into it was Farouk Hassan, and he become a black militant leader and formed the group the Nation of Domination. And I gotta say this, the Nation of Domination, man, is one of those groups I don't think gets nearly enough love. Couple different incarnations of it, but each incarnation was fucking great. Like when it started, it was Farouk along with Savio Vega and Crush, and then it would evolve into more of a African American Black Power group, and it was kind of like that before, But then they had PG-13 wrapping them into the ring, which I'll never forget. We are the Nation of Domination. Okay. Anyways, so yeah, Farouk, as the leader of the nation, had a great run there. Got to wrestle Undertaker at King of the Ring 97, challenged for the title, did not win it. And then just would feud later on with Crush and Savio as they left the group and formed their own groups, the Disciples of Apocalypse and Los Bordicas, respectively. And then later on would recruit guys like D'Lo Brown, and the Godfather would come in, and then Mark Henry, and of course The Rock. And then The Rock ends up taking over that group, kicks him out. But then you think that's it, and then sure enough, Ron Simmons comes back again and forms a partnership with Bradshaw, and they become the APA. And it's funny how that group started, because they were the Acolytes, and how they started off with just these minions of the Undertaker, these badass motherfuckers, just beating the piss out of people and stuff. And then how their characters evolved more into they were still called the Acolytes, but they weren't as far as the minions of the Undertaker, but just these badass dudes who like to drink and beat the shit out of people. And of course, then even after Ron's in-ring career pretty much dwindles down or dies down, then he becomes so much well known for damn. So man, what a unique career Ron Simmons had. And he's a Hall of Famer, and rightfully so. And he is on my list at number 9. And man, oh man, are we having some fun. But hey, we got to pump the brakes, because this is part 1 of our Baker's Dozen on my 13 favorite wrestlers of all time. But don't worry, you're only going to have to wait a mere 24 hours. That's right, as part 2 of our Baker's Dozen on professional wrestlers drops tomorrow. So that being said, I'm Jeremy, aka XLJVOG, and I'll see you next time on Colecast, the podcast for all of us. Take care. See you in a day.